Shall we first of all start by welcoming everybody to the first of our Research Hub meetings, and hopefully everybody that's seen the agenda recognises that we've got an interesting hour and a half ahead. So we're just going to take you through some formal information in the first instance. So we ask that, obviously, you've been to lots of these in the past, you'll be familiar with many of these, but we ask that you, as much as possible, try to be in this space that's here today. Mute if you're not talking. So we ask that you keep your mobiles on silent, keep muted until speaking. Raise your electronic hand if you want to ask a question, and hopefully there'll be an opportunity throughout today for you to do that. Feel free to use the chat space to raise questions, ask things, make comments, suggestions are all open. We're very open to that. There's an opportunity to rename. So there's Nia, could you pop the instructions for how to rename yourself so that people all know who's in the meeting? Fantastic. And also, if you're leaving, please let us know as well. We very much want this to be a space where we meet each other, so we'd ask that you keep your video on if at all possible. And as I've said before, try and be wholly present in this space. We don't often have these opportunities. So if we move on to the next slide, just want to give you a sort of a quick overview of what we're going to do today. So obviously we've had a bit of a welcome from myself. I will pass you over to Nia in a short while, and she will also give you some information about today's session. We're going to have an overview of the RDS Northwest service and the support that's available. We've got an invited speaker here, and then we'll break out into little groups to unpick that further. There's also an opportunity to understand some of the public health research funding that's available, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion about that. And we aim to close at 2:30. So the next bit of information is actually just to bring you up to speed with where we are today. So we launched the hub on the 28th of April, and many of you may have been in attendance at that. Now, obviously, it's still in its very it's in its infancy, shall we say. So a lot of what we talk about today is influenced by what was requested by people telling us, well, this is the sort of thing we'd want to hear about. But we've also done other. So we've now got a web page on the CHAMPS public health site. On that, we have listings of what we hope is quite useful information for you. And we've also circulated some information by email to those of you who've indicated that they're interested in joining the hub. Now, obviously, we are open to, again, people writing in or even calling me up and saying, this is what we want to see on the hub, or this is what we want the hub to do. So again, we don't want it to be just a one-way street here, very open to receiving comments and feedback. So one of the first questions we really have for you, and I'd welcome you to put your observations in the chat, is we've circulated some training opportunities from NIHR. We're interested to see if you've seen them and if you thought they were helpful or if you thought you needed more information. So can you answer that question in chat while I get on to the next bit of this, which is we've identified that MPH projects, obviously they come around once a year, around about early autumn, and there's an opportunity there to better link academia in with public health teams. So you might have a research question that could be answered in the short sort of space of time that an MPH project could be done. Let's link you together with the academic institutions that we've got. So that's something that we're looking to do, and I've got some meetings coming up quite soon with some of our academic leads to understand what's the best timing for this and how we can actually ensure that we link in with local authority colleagues on potential MPH projects. We've also been able to identify research champions from every local authority, which is really great news. And one of the things that we hope our research champions will be able to do is to, again, better link in between the hub and local authority teams to make sure we get a two-way flow of information. The final thing is that we've got, we will ensure that hub news is placed within the CHAMPS newsletter. So again, if you want to be in receipt of that, please do let us know. You can, again, make that clear by indicating that in in the chat, or follow up subsequently outside of this meeting with CHAMPS to tell them that you want to be included on their newsletter. So I'm now going to just hand you over to Nia, who will introduce herself and give you another small update before we get on to our first speaker. Nia, over to you.
Thanks, Ifeoma. Hi, everyone. Could we just have the next slide, please? Thanks. So those of you who came to the last workshop, you will have already heard me talk a little bit about this. This is just a reminder, really. So from all the work that Ifeoma and I've been doing and sort of wider team in launching the hub, we do need to show that we're making some kind of impact. So the main aim that we've all been working towards really is increasing this research culture in local authority. So to do that, we've put together a small research project alongside what we're doing, and there is a short survey, and it's totally anonymous, and I apologise for those of you who are not in local authority. So this is just for local authority staff only, for those working in public health. So I'm going to put the link now. If you have a chance to do that today, that would be brilliant if you've not managed to already. So all we're doing is sending out this survey, which is quite brief for you to complete now, or it was as close to the sort of launch as possible, and then again in about 6 months, and we'll see if it's had any impact. And we're basing it around the COMBI model, which is looking at your capability, opportunity, and motivation to sort of do research or use research, translate research into practice. You should have received that from the CHAMPS sort of central email. As I said, there's also a link here, so if you could do that today, that would be great. In particular, I said they're anonymous, but we can see which areas they've sort of come from, and I can see that we've not yet had any completed from people in St Helens, Cheshire East, and Cheshire West and Chester, so particularly welcome anyone who's based there, but also any of the other areas as well. There's only sort of 1 or 2 from most areas, so I would really appreciate if you have time to complete that. And as I said, 6 months' time, hopefully we'll get back to you about that. Just briefly to mention that, so the idea of this is to sort of see the impact of the launch of the hub. So if you can sort of cast your mind back a little bit to pre-April when you're completing the survey, that would be most helpful. Thank you. Back to you, Ifeoma. Oh, am I introducing Stephen? Sorry. Can we have the next slide, please?
Sorry, I'm just having a little bit of trouble with the next slide coming on.
Okay, no problem. Well, while we're waiting for you to do that, I'll introduce Stephen, who's our speaker today. So Dr. Stephen Lane is a lecturer at the University of Liverpool, but he's talking to us today in his capacity as an advisor for the Research Design Service Northwest. Stephen, are you able to take yourself on? I think your microphone's currently off.
It's on now.
Brilliant. Thanks,
Yeah,
Stephen.
sure. Okay, then.
Just opening Stephen's slides.
Okay, so we'll just wait a moment or two for the slides to come up.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, I'm sure 1 or 2 of you, particularly from an academic institute, have either come across me or the RDS before, you know, and if you have, all the better. If not, you know, what I'm going to try and do today, although I'm doing 2 presentations, I'm actually going to try and cover 3 topics, because as well as the RDS service and the funding streams available, I thought I'd try and give you some idea of the sort of things you need to think about when you actually come to design or put together your research application. Okay. Could you move to the next slide, please? just to give you a sort of historical background, the Research Design Service was set up in around 2008. So we've been doing this a good 14 years now. And the idea was that, what I should also say is it's a completely free service, this. It's funded by the National Institute for Health Research, NIHR. And the idea was that there was a feeling or a sense at the time there was a lot of clinicians working in the NHS or other institutes that had some very good research ideas that not only benefited the patients, but the NHS itself, but they didn't have the sort of expertise or the knowledge of how to get these ideas developed into a research plan, and then how to go about getting the funding. So the Northwest Service is actually one of 9 services that cover the whole of England. So if you're not applying to RDS Northwest for help, your colleagues in other areas are probably getting help from their regional service. So like I say, it is free to use. You can get as much help as you want, and I'll talk a bit more about that in detail later, and the sort of things we do. Okay, could you move on again, please? Now, although we're funded by NIHR, and there is a focus towards the NIHR funding streams, which might get stronger in the future, we are also allowed to give advice to people making applications to the Medical Research Council, and certainly any charities, certainly the bigger charities that have what they call a peer-reviewed funding stream. So if you're only looking for a tiny bit of money, and if somebody is sitting at the desk saying yes or no, then unfortunately the RDS can't really support applications like that. We're ones that are there for what they call open competition funding streams, and I'll talk to you a bit about them in the second half of the presentation. Okay, can you move to the next slide, please? So basically what the RDS does, it brings together a group of us that have various methodological expertise, because when you're putting your research application together, what these funders are interested in is seeing that you've got a team that can deliver the research that you're promising that you're going to do. So, for example, I'm a statistician as a methodologist. There's also health economics, people who do qualitative research, people who do systematic reviews. There's all that kind of expertise. Plus, another big thing with NIHR funding is they like patient-public involvement. So again, you can get help with putting together your patient-public involvement on study, because what NIHR like is that the patient is involved right from the beginning. So, they want a patient in there as part of your research team, and they want a patient to be a collaborator on your final bid, even if it's just to represent the patient at the various management meetings and such like, so that, throughout that study, the patient voice is always heard. And when you send in your applications to be reviewed, they'll be reviewed by at least 2 patient public advisors or laypersons. Okay, would you like to move on again, please? So we offer different types. Prior to COVID, we used to do a lot of face-to-face meetings. Nowadays, it's probably more convenient to do them, through Teams or Zoom. But we can also give advice on email, through telephone calls. And as well as providing a one-to-one service, we also run some workshop days. Usually each of the 3 arms of the Northwest, Lancaster, Liverpool and Manchester, they have at least one day a year when you'll focus maybe on newer researchers, or it may be something to do with more senior researchers who are looking to do things like health technology assessment applications, research for public benefit, which I'll talk to you about later, is another important one. So we do have these workshops throughout the year. Usually it's people, not just RDS advisors, but sometimes we get people from the panels to come and talk. You've got people coming to talk. People who have had a successful application, maybe sharing some tips as to what is a good and a bad thing to do. And then in the second half, usually in the afternoon, then you can have a more one-to-one session with maybe one or two advisors, just to get some specific advice on the sort of things that you want to do. The kind of things you need to think about when you come to doing your research, is first of all, have you got a good research question? Because one of the things NIHR won't do is to fund a study in an area if it's already been done somewhere else and the results can just be translated across. So you need to think about that. Another reason a lot of research funding gets knocked back is because although it's a good idea, it may not be implementable in practice. So again, you need to think about, can you actually implement your research in practice? The other thing you need to think about then is the kind of design you're going to do. NIHR is very risk averse, so whichever funding stream you go to, if you've got a relatively new idea, they often like you to do some feasibility pilot work first, a smaller scale study, if you like, to your big study. For example, I've collaborated on a public health application recently where it's a school's intervention and it's already been trialled in Australia. But even though it's been trialled in Australia, they still want us to do feasibility work to see whether it can actually be implemented in the UK schools before they would consider letting us go on to do the full trial to actually prove efficacy. So quite often with these funding streams, you are looking to do a smaller study first to answer questions like, can you recruit sufficient patients? Can you retain those patients in your study? Because what you want is, not just the patients to be there at the beginning of the study, but to be there at the end of the study. No matter how well you design the study, you're always going to get a lot of dropout. So often they want you to test out these kind of processes before they'll give you the money to go to your full trial. So again, we can help you with the design of the study. If you are going to a full trial, then again, we can help you design the study. As a statistician, the commonest question I get asked is, how many people do I need for my study? But then you've got to decide, with NIHR and all these funding streams, they want two groups in your study. You've got to have your control group who will get used, for NIHR, it's got to be the treatment as usual. And in a lot of cases, particularly if you're doing work in social services, mental health, things like that, you often find there isn't a single treatment as usual. Different places will have different treatments as usual. So you need to find out, decide what your treatment as usual is and what the intervention is that you're going to compare it with. Would you move to the next slide, please? So you've kind of got advice from us on the design. We can also put together the methodological expertise you need, because a lot of people may have a research idea, but if they're doing an economic evaluation, they maybe don't know any health economists. So we can put you in touch with health economists, statisticians, and we can help you build together that team, if you like, that gives you the best chance of succeeding. One thing I should say is that RDS can't guarantee that you will be successful, but we're there to try and help you have the best chance possible. And we haven't got any bias in these studies because the only benefit, if you like, to the research design services when people get a successful funded application. So just to give you some idea of what happens, when you apply for to Lancaster, they'll normally want you to answer a few questions, but I mean, you're talking 1 page of A4 here. You know, just some idea of what your research is about, maybe where you think you might need some help so that they can pass you on to an appropriate person. You know, what normally happens is you apply to Lancaster, it gets, if you're coming from Merseyside, Cheshire, you'll get triage. Now, it could go to Lancaster, or it could stay with Lancaster, or it could come to Liverpool, because Lancaster and Liverpool tend to combine, and we cover the sort of northwest coast footprint. So, you know, we're going up to sort of Blackpool in the north, even Barrow in Furness, down, you know, through Cheshire in the south. So Lancaster and Liverpool tend to work together. The third group involved, Manchester, they tend to be more specific towards Greater Manchester and Salford area. But what happens is you get passed to a case manager, you know, you'll have your initial meeting, maybe say, for example, it's with me. We'll discuss your research, you know, I'll give you some advice, maybe, you know, what sort of boxes you need to tick to start with. You know, you need, like I said before, you know, the research has to be fairly unique. You know, you've got to do some kind of literature survey to find out what's out there, because again, as part of the application form, you know, they want to know what's already been done, if you like, and what your evidence there is to support your research. You know, I can then help if you need a qualitative person to give you some advice on health economics. I can pass you on to them and arrange for you to talk to them. The other thing is, RDS also provides a bursary of £350 or up to £350, which is to pay for any PPI work. So, you know, pre-COVID, people were running focus groups, and the PPI work was to cover things like some refreshments, maybe a cup of tea, sandwiches. Now, as any of you probably know, who's applied to NIHR before, if you apply for the PPI bursary, you have to itemise every tea bag, every slice of bread that you're using. You know. And to be honest, I've come across 1 or 2 trusts that have said, you know, it's actually less costly for them just to pay the money out to the petty cash than it is to set up a grant scheme to reclaim the money back, because what happens is you've got to spend the money first and then claim it back from Lancaster. But the money is there if you want it. Nowadays, because people are doing more of these activities online, then, you know, it's usually just to give maybe a £10 thank you gift or something like that for people to take part. So the money is there. That's only there to help you, you know, put your grant application together. If you want, which most NIHR funding streams insist, is that you have a collaborator from the PPI bit, then you would have to cost them in as part of your research costs on your grant. Okay, so if you'd like to move on again. Yeah, I think we've already covered a lot of these. You know, it's things like, have you got a strong research question? You know, what existing research is out there? Is there a need for the research? But again, you've got to be able to justify why the research is needed. You know, things like study design, we've already talked about. You know, do you need to do a small-scale feasibility pilot trial to give assurance that, or confidence that you can go on and do your full trial? You know, you need to think about your recruitment strategy, particularly if it's a a multi-centre trial because, you know, quite often nowadays you need quite large sample sizes to do these definitive studies. So they are looking at for a multi-centre trial. You know, one of the other things with NIHR is that at the end of the day, they want an intervention that can be rolled out across all the other trusts in England and Wales. So, you know, it's often a good thing to actually have more than one centre in your trials. If it's a big definitive trial of a CTIM, which is a medical intervention, then you need things like clinical trials units to help manage your study. You know, from people like me, you need to know what your sample size is. You know, and you also need to know your cost. Now, if you're in Liverpool, there is a thing called Spark, an organisation. And what Spark will do is they will actually do your NHS costs. But that Spark is unique to Liverpool, and I'm not sure how far their footprint covers when it comes to which trust they cover. But, you know, certainly if you're in the Merseyside area, you can get this help with things like your excess treatment costs and the cost to the NHS. Okay, do you want to move on again? Yeah, I've already talked about the PPI funding. You know, like I say, you can ask for a maximum of up to 350,000. It can be a bit convoluted to do. You know, it will be reviewed, and quite often these people will say to you, have you considered doing this, or why don't you do that, or why are you doing something else? So, you know, there can be a bit of a to and fro iteration process, but normally, you know, eventually, if you stick at it, you will get your money. Okay, like to move on? Okay, you'll be pleased to know that it really is what the RDS does. I mean, just to summarise, it's a free service, and we're open to anybody who's looking to do make a peer-reviewed application for research funding. Okay, then, so I'm quite happy to answer any questions if anybody's got any.
Thanks, Stephen. Can I just remind everyone to keep themselves on mute? I think there's still a little bit of background noise I can just hear. If anyone has any questions, please do put your hand up, or you can write them in the chat.
Actually just gonna change as that shows up to all.
So, given that nobody appears to have any questions, and we could hear somebody faintly in the background, I'm wondering if that person could possibly go on mute for us, please. It's slightly confusing when you're hearing that in your headset as well. Okay, so Stephen, I did have a question for you actually, and it was how quickly or how responsive is your service? So if I wanted to do a piece of research, how soon should I really get in contact with you?
Well, the earlier the better, really. I mean, you know, if it's somebody who's doing it for the first time, then you're probably looking at, you could be looking at it from 6 months to a year to put a good application together. Because, you know, you've got to be 110%. These things are very competitive. And so the earlier you come to us, the better. Obviously, we have people coming to us from the universities who are experienced researchers, and they often just want a critical read-through of their application without wanting any methodological or other advice. But I'd say you've got to start thinking at least 6 months in advance before you put these applications in.
So the other part of my question was how responsive are you? So how quickly are you likely to get back to me if I were to come to you with something?
Well, usually within a couple of days. I mean, I can't speak for Lancaster, but I know they've often sent me requests from people wanting a critical read the day before the deadline. So we can be very responsive. I mean, to be honest, we don't want to be that responsive because you're probably not ready yourself if you're coming that late with the application.
Thank you. We've got a couple of other hands. Nia, I'm going to save you for a couple of seconds and ask Julie to come in, and then Nia, you can ask your question.
Hi, thanks, Ifeoma. Hi, Stephen. Can I just clarify? So obviously we're talking here about quite sometimes quite large research grants, but am I right in saying the RDS will support with the smaller, perhaps charitable pots of money that might be available and things like that? You know, not necessarily the big sort of chunky stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to come on to that in the second part, but yes, we will cover charities, providing it's an open, peer-reviewed process.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Nia?
Thanks. I'm going to do a classic academic. It's more of a comment than a question, but I just thought I'd add, seeing as Stephen brought up the PPI fund and also in terms of your question, Ifeoma, I recently contacted the RDS, so I went through to Lancaster, given I'm based within Lancaster University, and as he said, they came back to me within a couple of days. I had a very broad idea, a sort of rough idea about some work I wanted to do with some public contributors, but knowing that I needed to pay them as well, which I think is part of the issue as well. I know Stephen talked about you can get some petty cash, but I think particularly for sort of early career researchers or people who don't have access to that, you do need to pay contributors for their time. So they got back to me in a couple of days. I had a meeting within a week, and then there's loads of support there, loads of guidance, and it was really, really useful. And the again, the application form for that is a very brief sort of one side of A4. So I'd really recommend it if you have an idea, as Stephen says, as early as possible, because it can really help shape your research question.
Yeah, that's what NIHR are looking for, is that, you know, a lot of this research is actually being shaped by the patients and not just the researcher.
Okay, so thank you very much, Stephen. We've heard pretty much an update of what the RDS service can do. Hopefully, we'll be able to share how we actually get in contact with your service. And I think that the key thing for me was the importance of ensuring that we've got patient representation, that lay representation, very, very early on. Quite often we wait till sort of what's a little way down the line before we then involve that patient. So for me, what really stood out was that need to get people involved, and the fact that there's that small little pot of money for teas and coffees. I don't know if 250 quid would actually be enough nowadays, but we'll see. I mean, if things are online, you probably wouldn't need any funding at all, but it's interesting that 350 was the amount of money that's available. So what we're going to do now is we've got a little bit of a breakout session. You've been talked to for quite a while, everybody. So because we do want to try and make this interactive and get people speaking, we've come up with a breakout activity. So we're going to pop that slide up just to make it clear what I'm going to ask you to do. So many of you will be aware that we've been doing some marmot workshops in the region, and we had a launch of Altogether Fairer earlier on in this, I think it was May, wasn't it, where we had the launch of the most recent marmot paper. And from that, we've picked 3 potential research areas, all pretty much focused on children, because of course we need to give every child the best start in life. So if you look at these 3 main topics, early childhood development, child poverty, and school readiness, we're going to break you out into little groups, and we're going to ask you to pick one of these themes, and it doesn't matter if you all pick the same one, but pick one of those 3 in your group, and then think about how you would turn this into a research question and what support you might need from the RDS, given what you've just heard now. So we're trying to make what you've heard a little bit more practical. So I'm going to ask for some support now. We are going to be in these breakout groups for about 15 minutes, so not too long. So if you can help us break back into those groups, we'll come back at, we'd said 13:45, but we probably, because of time, need to add a little bit of time. So we'll come back at the time now, 40. So about 13:55, and then we'll go over, we'll hear back some of that feedback. Hi, I'm hoping that everybody's back and that you had an interesting exchange of ideas. We're not going to ask for feedback at this. We're going to invite Stephen to take us through his next set of information. So Jenny, if you're able to share those slides, we're going to hear from Stephen again, and he's going to talk to us this time about some funding and how we can actually potentially access that funding. So over to you, Stephen.
Yeah, it's all right if you want to move on to the first slide. Yeah, I mean, this section really is about the different NIHR funding streams available. And I will apologise that some of these slides are quite busy. So what it is really, it's just a chance to go through some of these funding streams. The way it normally works is there's what's called researcher calls, and there's usually 3 of those a year. Now, a researcher call means you can put forward whatever research topic you like. It's up to you. There are also, and again, these come up 2 or 3 times a year, what they call commission calls. And they're calls usually in a specific area where somebody has either identified or suggested a particular need for a piece of research. The one thing with commission calls is they do tend to have some fairly short deadlines. Now, if I had my cynical hat on, I would say that's because there's somebody out there who's already got a research proposal close to being ready to submit, and they're the ones who've actually put forward the suggestion because theirs is ready to go, knowing that everybody else is probably going to have to struggle with a short deadline. As far as the research calls goes, the 3 a year, so they're approximately 4 months apart, although you do tend to get some slippage. Because the way it works is that these funding applications are actually a 2-stage process. So first of all, you do a stage 1 application, which means you've got to give a good overview of your proposed research, your ballpark costings and everything. It goes to the funding panel. If they like it, they will then invite you to submit a 2nd stage application. And normally, if you get a successful 1st stage application, you've got 7 or 8 weeks to submit your 2nd stage. And your 2nd stage has got to be a lot more detailed on the research. It's also got to have, more detailed costings. So quite often I tell people, if you're submitting a stage 1 application, you have to carry on working on your stage 2 application. Otherwise, because you're often relying on other people, it's a team of people that are putting in these research applications. It's better if you can give yourself as much time as possible to actually put that application together. So now I'll just go through a few of the funding streams. What you've got to remember is, for all these funding streams, except research for patient benefit, which I'll talk to you about in a bit more detail, these are open to anybody, whether it's NHS, academic, and you can get anything up to a couple of £1 million in funding. So, So first of all, if you'd like to move on again. Could you move it on again, please? And again. Okay, so these are the funding streams. I've talked to you a bit about the commission, the research, the themed calls. These are there to meet a specific need. Obviously during COVID, there was a lot of COVID calls. At the moment, they seem to have an issue with big data sets, and they're always looking for people to develop interventions around these AI algorithms and neural network type approaches. So first of all, you've got the EME program. Now, the idea with EME is a lot of clinical trials go through this one. And if you're doing a clinical trial, you need the support of a clinical trials unit. And believe me, they are not cheap. So these, you get anything up to a couple of £1 million for a study like this. And where it maybe differs from the HTA funding stream is, they do like you to do some investigation onto the mechanisms as to why a particular intervention might work. Later on, HTA, which stands for Health Technology Assessment, again, that is one that clinical trials go to. And that usually involves not just testing the efficacy, but also some health evaluation in terms of cost effectiveness and things like that. So EME, is looking for some explanation of to why an intervention might work. HTA is looking for things like showing that your intervention will work and doing some cost effectiveness on it as well to show that it is cost effective. Can you move on again, please? Yeah, we've just talked about HTA. Again, this is the one that a lot of seasoned researchers go for, because this is the one where you're doing your clinical trial to show that an intervention is effective. And as I've said, in the first part, when you do these trials, your NIHR are looking for you to compare your new intervention with whatever the standard treatment is. Because quite often, if you've got AstraZeneca wanting to do a drug trial, they want to compare against the placebo, which is inert treatment. NIHR don't like you comparing against placebos. They want you to compare against a treatment that's already out there that's being used. Okay, then next one, please. Yeah, HS and DR, the service and delivery research, that is aimed at interventions to maybe improve the service that's available, and maybe looking at new ways of not treating the patient, but how a service is run. The one you guys are probably going to be more interested in is the second one there, the public health research. And that funds research outside the NHS. I know from sort of experience, one of the difficulties with public health research is because you're often looking to make the intervention in sort of charitable run institutes or charitable run places, that you often need the money up front to pay for the expertise, which is slightly different from some of the other research funding streams. So, you know, like I said, I know from past experience that often can prove difficult with public health research. That, you know, if you want a psychologist or something to go into a charitable run intervention, then, you know, you need to pay for it up front. And it's not always easy, but, you know, public health will help with things like that. Okay, can you jump on to the next one? Yeah, in intervention for innovation, that is the one that's looking to fund new devices or to prove new devices. At the moment, there's a lot of emphasis going around on these AI algorithms. They see that as being a device rather than an intervention. The idea is that you can get things like a challenge award if you're a small SME, a small medium enterprise. They'll help you to maybe partly develop your intervention. You then get your public development awards, and that's about really developing the intervention and getting it to a state where it's ready for commercialisation. Because what IFRI is looking for is often commercial products. And for that reason, they like a collaboration. It's either got to be industry, academia, or the NHS. Now, when I say industry, not AstraZeneca, but some small, medium enterprises. And they like a collaboration between 2 out of 3. Yeah, and one of the keys to things like I4I is, you know, you need a good business plan. So you've got to show them that there is a commercial market out there for the device you're looking to develop. And at the same time, you know, it will have benefit to the patient or the NHS. On to the next one. Okay, research for patient benefit. Now, that is a regional pot of money. And it basically replaced the money that back in the past used to get paid directly to the trust R&D research departments. And there's currently 3 tiers of funding for this. You get up to £150,000 for doing things like maybe systematic reviews or some development work in your research. You can then go up to £250,000, which will fund you to do your feasibility work. And then there's an upper limit of 350k, which is for a full trial. And to be honest, I rarely see any full trials going through research for patient benefit because, you know, it's nearly impossible to do, you know, a multi-centre, fully definitive trial for 350k or less. You know, but if you're thinking about doing, you know, some feasibility work, this is often the one for you. You know, it does have that limit to 250. It also does allow you some leeway if you're a new researcher. You know, whereas the other funding streams, as I already said, you know, with public health research, you know, you are usually looking at serious expertise. Researchers will get funded for that because of the amounts of money involved. Yeah. So my advice was, if you're a new researcher, think about research for patient benefit as your better option. You know, because it's a smaller pot of money, it's regional, and they are supposed to give some leeway for new researchers. The social care research programme, again, that's a fairly new one. They seem to only have 1 call a year at the moment. That's again one that, you know, some of you guys will probably be interested in. But again, you know, it's almost this chicken and the egg situation that because these are open pots of money and they'll give you anything up to 2 million or more, you know, it's difficult to go in there unless you have got serious expertise because you are competing against, you know, established academic groups. Okay, next one, please. Yeah, programme grants. Again, the idea with a program grant is that it's 3 or 4 pieces of work, and there has to be an advantage in doing them as 3 or 4 interlinked pieces of research rather than doing them as individual pieces of research. And again, unless you're very expertise, you're not going to have much chance of getting a program grant. Program development grants, they're if you need to just develop one small part of your program grant, they're up to £100,000. They're only eligible for a year, whereas most other grants are 3 or 4 year grants. And the idea is it's just there if you need to do one small piece of work to make your program grant doable. But to be honest, again, it's a difficult one to get this, because not only do you have to sell the development grant, but you've also got to be able to sell them your program grant as well. And just going back to your feasibility studies and things like that, again, if you're planning to do a feasibility study, again, you've got to be able to sell your full study as well, and you've got to be able to show them the pathway from your feasibility study into your full study. Nowadays, if you apply for a smaller research grant to do feasibility work, they'll ask you, who are you going to actually go for to get your full grant to do your full study? So, they do like to see that there is a pathway there, because, what was happening back in the day was that, people had applied for a feasibility study, but would then never go on and do the full study. So they are a bit more risk averse now with things like that, that, you've got to be able to show them that there is a pathway to your full study. And they also like to know, what are the stop-go criteria. For example, a go criteria might be that you can retain 70% of the people who take part in your study. They want to know things like that as part of your application. Okay, would you like to move on again, please? Yeah, things like the policy research programme. Again, it's there really to look at, some of the policies and can we improve them. I've got to admit, it's not one that I've had a lot of involvement with. They will fund systematic reviews. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the systematic review, but the idea is you're going through all the literature, published, unpublished literature, to see what's out there. And it's often something you need to do prior to you doing some of your other grant applications. Or at least, maybe not a full systematic review, but you need to do a literature survey. You will fund systematic reviews, but again, they can be quite difficult to get, because one of the issues with systematic reviews is that by the time you search for your information, put your review together, something new's come out and things have already moved on, you've already updated. So, you have to have a good justification for wanting to do that. One of the other things I haven't talked about is fellowship application, fellowship grants. Now, where with a research grant is going to your institution and you're part of a team, fellowship grants can be more personal, and you can start with an MSc, PhD grant, early career, mid-career, and then senior career fellowships. And with a fellowship, as well as taking into account the research you're doing, they'll take into account you as a person and also the institute where you work, because they want to develop the top 5% researchers who are going to go on and become professors and things in the future. And quite often, if there's research institutes in Oxford and Cambridge somewhere who are actually the leaders, they would like to see you going over there and working with them. Now, sometimes you can do it, you go over there for maybe a couple of months or even out abroad, but quite often, you know, they will look at the institute you're at. And if it isn't a high quality research institute, you know, you can get turned back on that. And I have known people, they've said, you know, we like your idea, but we want you to go and work in London somewhere because that's where the expertise is. So, you know, fellowship grants are good in one way because it means, you know, if you can find places to host you, you can go to these places. But it might mean that, you know, if your institute doesn't have sufficient high profile as a top quality researcher in that area, then you can get knocked back for that reason. So, strictly speaking, the RDS can only advise you on the actual research, but you know, it's difficult to advise people on research if you're not advising about the other considerations as well. Okay, then, do you want to jump on? Great. So has anybody got any questions then? You know, as I said earlier, you know, RDS will, you know, can give advice if you're applying for, you know, charitable fundings, MRC as well as NIHR. But I think in future we are going to be more focused on NIHR funding.
Okay, so thank you very much, Stephen. I suppose the big question that I had listening to your presentation was, how do we know that these grants are available? Are they available potentially or all the time? And what's the best way to keep ourselves updated about them?
The best way is the NIHR website, because what tends to happen is, you see, they don't, how can I put it, they don't put these grants up in too far in advance. I mean, you know, they'll only have one funding deadline open at a time, and they won't let you know the next funding deadline until the previous one has passed, if that makes sense. So, but if you go onto the NIHR website, that's usually the best one for the funding stream that you're interested in.
Yeah, thanks very much. And Nia's very kindly popped that information in the sidebar. One of the things that was very clear to us when we set up the hub was the fact that some information's quite static. So some information we could put on a website and people would be able to access it and it would always be the same. Some of the information, particularly around the training opportunities and some of the funding opportunities, are a little bit more fluid and likely to have very clear endpoints. And what we didn't want is to clutter up the website, particularly with, or rather the web page, with opportunities that had perhaps got a sell-by date on them. So that's why, as much as possible, when we find out about this sort of thing, we aim to send it out by email. I have one hand up, and that's Julie. So Julie, do you want to come in?
Hi, yeah, Ifeoma. That website is a current website that is constantly evolving. What I was going to say for public health, so if you look at the right hand side of it, it breaks it down into specialties. I suppose the challenge for public health is that it could sit in a number of those specialties, really. So and that's one of the slight frustrations. It's not respiratory necessarily. So to look for those calls sometimes you have to go through a number of specialties, and it was just to point that out. It doesn't sit in any one necessarily. It could sit in paediatrics, it could sit in health service delivery research, it could sit in public health as obviously a public health specialty, but it might sit elsewhere. Some are players for people to look at the other specialties really as well. Yeah, just a comment really, Ifeoma, if that's okay.
That's fine. And just to come back to Julie, presumably then the likes of the RDS would be able to advise us to where the better place is to get some of this funding, if perhaps ones come with a big piece of research they want to do.
Yeah, so I think linking in obviously with Stephen and the team at Lancaster and Liverpool is really important, and linking in also most probably with the clinical research network, because obviously we're linking in with all our specialty leads and the national conversations, so we know what kind of things maybe potentially are coming through and might sit in North West Coast. So yeah, most definitely. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. So I think the next part of our agenda today is to really sort of sum up some of the things that have been discussed. As I've already alluded to, our intention is to keep people updated in two different ways through the website. I keep calling it the website. It's not an independent website. It is a page on the CHAMPS website. So we intend to keep our rather more static information there. I think it's important that we thank Steve for his contributions today and in terms of giving us these updates, and thank you all as well for attending. I think the key thing that really came out from this for me is that there are a number of different potential funding pots available, and that it's important that we get this information out to you and that it really reaches you, which is why it's important that we make these links with our research champions. Did anybody want to come in and raise any questions about anything else that's been covered today? Have people put anything additional within the chat? Okay, with no hands flying up, I don't know if that's a new hand or an old hand.
Ifeoma, it's a new hand really. Yeah, it was just
Okay.
to highlight, if that's okay, the NIHR Spark Round 2, which will be going live, I think, at the end of September. If you and Nia, I'm happy to share far and wide really. So it's a potential practitioner academic career pathway, funding of up to £15,000. When Stephen talked about the fellowships and those kind of things, it's on a similar kind of footprint really, a similar kind of design, and also they're also looking for local authorities who might want to host one of those roles. So there is a Google sheet attached in that email. If there's any particular local authorities that have an interest in potentially hosting one of them, people could maybe have a look at it. It's gone, obviously it's the second round, so I think the first round was quite successful. I think possibly the gentleman from Warrington maybe got one of those. So yeah, so right. It's just for people to look at, if that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Nia.
I was just going to add to that yeah, the person in Warrington was going to talk today about the LA Spark, but unable to. So hopefully they're going to talk at the next one. So if anyone else is interested in doing that, they're going to give some sort of lessons learned and a bit of an overview about the application process.
Okay, that's great. So if we move on to the next slide, I think it's important that people know when we're going to do this again. So there's some dates that we've identified where we will meet. In between, we hope to have meetings with our research champions so that we can help to shape these meetings a little better. I think given the time, I don't want to keep people over So if you want to just scribble in the chat if there's anything that you think would be useful for us to cover in a future meeting, and I'll just tell you a little bit extra about the MPH projects. We've got a meeting, like I say, in a couple of weeks' time, so I'd really appreciate if people could remember, I think a question's already gone out to local authorities to say, if you've got an MPH project in mind, could you let us know so that we can actually put these to the university when we meet them. I think the only other thing that I have to do today is to just quickly hand over to Nia in terms of something that we're going to ask you to do today.
Thank you. Can we just have the next slide, please? So for those of you who've been to our previous meetings, we're trying to end with some kind of commitment to an action so we can sort of keep the momentum going on this, of increasing the kind of research in local authority. So if anything has inspired you today, or if you've had any thoughts about what you might do in terms of your next step, I'd really like to invite you to commit to an action following this meeting and just pop it in the chat. We won't follow up on this or ask you to sort of talk about it in any more detail, but it's just so you have an idea about what you might do to sort of keep the momentum going after this meeting. So whether that is to think about a possible project for MPH, sort of a master's level project, which might be a really good stepping stone to thinking about the next step in terms of getting funding after that, or whether you think you're in a position to contact the RDS. It would be really great to hear if you've got any thoughts about what you might do after this meeting.
So while you're putting your thinking caps on, one of the things that I will definitely do following this is that I will ensure that the information that Julie's just mentioned is sent out to people through email. So Julie, in between, sent me that information about the LA Spark post. So we'll make sure that everybody that's in attendance today has sight of that, and we'll also try and get that onto the CHAMPS newsletter so that people who have access to the CHAMPS newsletter can also access it that way. I also see in the chat that Tara has, that's the DPH from Warrington, said that Andrew is indeed the person, the spark person in her team. I know I've certainly met Andrew, and she says that his role there has been really fantastic. Thank you also to Francis, who said something about exploring that MPH opportunity more fully with public health practitioners, which is a really great idea and something that we want to see happening. So if you don't already receive the CHAMPS newsletter, please let us know as well. We're happy to expand that as far and wide as possible. So in the dying moments of this meeting, I'm going to ask that you also complete an evaluation form, which I believe will be sent out to you. There's a link that we're going to share for the CHAMPS website as well. I can see that Nina's interested in exploring the CHAMPS website and signing up for the newsletter, so that's great. We're actually going to pop the link to the CHAMPS website here so that you can find out how to access it, and that would include enabling you sign up for the website. I'd really be keen for these to be a lot more interactive, and hopefully once we've got rid of COVID or managed to rise from under the shadow of COVID, that we'll be able to have some face-to-face meetings at some point. I don't think it's particularly helpful that we've got the shadow of COVID with us as we move into autumn, winter, and our next potential meetings in November. Can can we move on to the last slide potentially, because that's got the link to the website. Thanks. The one after? Cheers. Is that clickable on? Ah, so you see, cunning plan. Oh, there you go. I wonder if we can also just pop that in the sidebar. Somebody said you'll never get rid of COVID. I know it's here to stay. It is here to stay, definitely. So if we can just put the link to the CHAMPS website in the side, and then people will be able to actually access that.
The link is there if you just scroll up a little bit.
Is it? Yeah, I have said sort of offline to Nia that I've got the Mickey Mouse version of Teams, so I've got limited functionality on what mine can do. So I'm going to thank you all for coming. And if, like I say, something occurs to you, something that you want to see in our future meetings, then please do let us know. Thank you once again for our speakers, to our organisers and background supporters from CHAMPS, and to all of you as well for attending. Thank you very much, and goodbye.